All right, good evening, everyone. I have 5:30 Pacific time. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm Dieter Borman with Hanford Contractor Central Plateau Cleanup Company. Thanks for joining tonight's virtual public meeting. So tonight we're going to be talking about some proposed changes to the Hanford Federal Facility Agreement and Consent Order, that's better known as the Tri-Party Agreement. And our three agency presenters will explain in more detail what those changes are all about here shortly. The changes do correspond with a 45-day public comment period that began on July 5th and is scheduled to end on August 19th. Just a few details before we start the presentations. Tonight we'll be using the chat box feature in Microsoft Teams. You can enter questions anytime, and we will get to those as soon as the presentations are over. We're going to hold the questions till the end of our speakers. We've also added to the Teams meeting links to some materials that pertain to tonight's meeting, including how to submit public comments and an evaluation link for the end of the meeting. You can also find those all on the events calendar on hanford.gov. So if you're on the phone only, you did enter muted, and to unmute, you'll need to press *6 to ask a question, and then press *6 again to return to mute. And we ask that you stay on mute unless you are asking a question. If you are on a computer or your phone, you can submit questions again at any time using the chat box. And once we get to that portion of the meeting, if you would like to read them yourself, that is fine. Or if you prefer that we read them here to have our presenters respond to, we can do it that way too. I think that is it for my part of the introduction. Any questions before we get going? All right, let's go ahead, and I'd like to introduce here our speakers for tonight. From the U.S. Department of Energy, we have Mike Klein. Mike is the Director of Hanford Soil and Groundwater Division. From the Washington State Department of Ecology, John Price is joining us. He's a Hanford Section Manager. And from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Craig Cameron is with us, and he is a Hanford Project Manager for EPA. So let's go ahead and get started with Mike. The floor is yours.
Okay. As Peter said, my name is Mike Klein. I am with Department of Energy in the Soil and Groundwater Division. A lot of these milestones dealing on the Central Plateau fall under my responsibility, so I get to give a presentation. And I was heavily involved in negotiating the milestones. But before we actually start to talk about the adaptive milestone approach, I'd like to talk a little bit about this public meeting and the public review. What's out for review in the public domain is 17 milestones. We call them near-term milestones. They were an attempt to provide some good faith milestones, provide some progress showing that we're doing work, provide some enforceability by the regulatory agencies, and allow us time to develop the adaptive milestone tool set that we will be talking about here. The milestones that were placed in advance, and there were 14 milestones placed in advance, we were not going to make those. We started those milestones, I think, back in 2012. We renegotiated them again in 2016, and we keep doing the same thing. We're negotiating milestones based on a funding profile that we know we probably won't get, but the mindset was if we have more compliance milestones, we would get more funding to do the work. That didn't work, and we negotiated those milestones several times now. We went back to the table and we said, we got to do something different. We got to put our heads together and do something different because this just isn't working. We need to be smarter. We are not getting more money. That's obvious. We haven't. And we need to find a way to get this work done with what we have, do it smarter, do what's right, and do what's risk-based. Let's come up with a way to identify what work should be done when, based on risk, based on workforce, based on budget, based on a lot of different factors that will play into it, and we'll get into some of that with the adaptive milestone approach. But the actual public review is for the milestones, the near-term milestones, 22 to 24, fiscal years 22 to 24, achievable milestones that we can show some cleanup, show some enforceability while we develop the adaptive milestone tool set that we will help use to determine what milestones should be scheduled, when, and what work makes sense to do before other work, the priority.
Nothing was bullshit. It's absolutely bullshit.
What's one milestone? Is
Right.
it a mile?
Anyway, with,
Just a reminder to please put your phone on mute. Thank you.
okay, so with that said, we'll go into the adaptive milestone approach, which is the basis for putting the milestones in abeyance and coming up with the near-term milestones that are actually out for the public review. The adaptive milestone approach will not be part of the tri-party agreement. It is a tool that we will use to help, along with EPA and ecology, develop what set of milestones should come next. And that's really what it comes down to. So the regulatory framework is a tri-party agreement. It's an agreement between DOE, between EPA, between ecology. It sets the schedule for the cleanup work being done on site. Changes can be made, and we usually bring those changes to the public unless they're solely administrative, to get public input and get public review on the milestone sets that we are changing or revising. Okay, so the milestones we're talking about here that were placed in abeyance are the Central Plateau milestones, it's decision document milestones, it's RIFS investigation milestones, and it is waste site cleanup milestones that all focused on the Central Plateau. This is a pilot approach. The adaptive milestone approach is a pilot program. Is there a question? Okay, so it is a pilot program. We do anticipate that if successful, or when successful, I should say, it will be expanded to include all areas of the site, but right now it's focused on the Central Plateau milestones, and we're gonna give this a try, and it's gotta be better than the way we were doing it, because the way we were doing it, we were behind the 8 ball from day one. We didn't get the budget we were planning to, and we were in some cases $200-300 million under what we needed to be compliant. We do request a compliant budget every year, we just don't get it. And that's out of our control, that's Congress, and we cannot legally go lobby Congress for more money. We put our request in, we get what we get. Next slide, please. Okay, so the pilot approach for the near term, and that's what's out in the public domain for review, is 3 years worth of milestones. A couple of them might go past 24, but it was nominally a 3-year period to give us time to develop this approach and to develop which milestones should come next and set the schedule for the remaining milestones that are in abeyance, bring them back in, give them dates, and that will come to play in 2024. We will propose the next set of milestones for a nominal 3-year period. And we will propose dates for the out-year milestones that are in abeyance. But the whole point of the adaptive milestone is things change. We didn't know Purex tunnels were going to collapse 3 years ago, but they did. We had to focus on that. Risks are changing every day, and we need to account for that. We need to be able to change things as needed, as things come up, as different things emerge. And so this is why we call it adaptive. It will adapt as time goes on. As we get things completed, we will look at what we've done, how it worked, and decide what's the best path to go next. So we're going to focus on the interim milestones, the near term, and there's 17 milestones. However, I like to refer to it, there's actually 13 milestones, and then there's 4 milestones to establish further milestones. So there's really 13 milestones of actually doing work. They were not proposed by DOE. They were done jointly with EPA and ecology. We all got together. We each came to the table with about 10 milestones of activities we would like to see done over the next few years. We compared notes. A lot of them were the same. Some of them were different. We discussed them, and we came up with the 13 milestones to actually go forth and do some work over the next 3 years. And then we threw the other milestones in for developing future milestones. We want to make sure that something's in the books to get those other milestones prioritized and scheduled. So that's what we're doing here. We're demonstrating some cleanup progress, and we are allowing time to get the tool set developed and the adaptive milestone approach to come into play. We will maintain the long-term cleanup goals. We will do all the work eventually. The real question is, when's the right time to do it? It's all going to get done, but does it make sense to do one thing over another? We want some help with that. We want a system to help us identify and inform us on what we should be working on next. Next slide, please. So there's a schedule here. What does it look like? Well, right now we have a set of milestones for 22, 23, and 24. We will look at those. We will work off those milestones. We will achieve those milestones. Those did happen to line up where we have a new contractor on board and we got those milestones into the contract. We were early enough, so we don't have to do a bunch of contract changes for this, which is a good thing. And we will continue that mode as we process the milestones in the future. When we get to 24, we will be looking at the output from the adaptive milestone tool set, which is a computer program. Ultimately, it's computer-based, but it is a tool set. It's a tool for us to look at and be informed, and we can move forward with milestones. In 24, we will lay out a schedule for all the rest of the milestones. However, we will review that every few years to see, does it still make sense? Has something else came up? Has something emerged that maybe should bump priority on something else? And it won't be done in a vacuum. It will be the three parties sitting down together and looking at what we've done, what needs to be done, and what makes sense to do it, what order to do it in. Next slide, please. Okay, so what does the approach look like? Well, we're going to evaluate and identify the milestone period, the activities that need to be worked on. We will negotiate the milestones as we go down the road. We will adjust them, and that's the important part. That's the adaptive part. We will adjust the milestones as needed as different things come up and as the work gets completed, and we learn from doing the work. Maybe it was better to do something else first. That's something we will factor into the approach as we go down the road. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit on the computer application. Okay, so we're factoring a lot of different things. There's 5 items on the left there. We have prioritization, we have data, plant data, we have some project decisions, staffing data, and of course, financial data. There's only so much money. We will not overcommit as we did in the past. We're not going to be $200-300 million behind the 8 ball to start. We will be more realistic with what we actually think we will get from Congress, the money we anticipate. So we will factor all those things in. I think there's about 50 to 70 different factors that can be applied into this program. This program will also look at the Hanford Life Cycle Baseline, and that is the original schedule that all the work is laid out. We'll look at that. We'll look at any existing milestones that have to be cleaned up. We'll look at any risks, and that's the main part to look at, is what is the risk to the environment, to the public, to the workers on site. We need to start mitigating those risks and deal with those first. And that's really some of the ability here, is to look at this from more of a risk-based, not someone's hidden agenda, not someone's little pet project that they want done. Look at what makes sense to do from a risk base. Let's mitigate the risk. Let's reduce the risks on site, and then continue with the cleanup. Like I said, all the cleanup's going to get done. It's just what makes sense to do first. So we're going to take this application. It's going to juggle through the life cycle baseline. It's going to factor in all those risks, and it's going to provide some information. It's not going to give us a list of milestones. It's not going to give us a list of activities. It's going to provide information on what would give us a big risk reduction, what will keep our workforce, our skilled workforce, working. We don't want to lay off a section of our workforce only to have to bring them back a year later and then have to spend a year training them back up. So we do look at workforce issues too, and impacts to our workforce. Eventually the work is ramping down, but there are certain skills that we will need in the future, and we want to make sure we keep them around and they don't go away. We want that experience left here. So we will take all this information, we will sit down with EPA, with ecology, and we will go through and we will make decisions based on the information given from the tool set as to what we should work on next and what makes sense to work. What's the right schedule to work these things in? Next slide, please. So some of the advantages, it provides the agility to adjust. If we're constantly looking at this and we're setting up, re-looking at every 3 years a set of milestones, is what we set in 24 still the same set that we should be doing in 27, or do we need to adjust that based on what we found, based on what we completed, or based on what emerging issues may come up? We don't know what's going to come up in the future, but those are the things, those things that are causing us a lot of risk at this time, like the PRX tunnels, like some of the cribs that are subject to subsidence and collapsing that we're trying to work with. Those are things we need to attack first, as opposed to some facility that really provides no risk whatsoever and can sit there a little longer. We need to attack the risk-based work first. So TPA agencies can assess the viability of it. If we do a rolling every 3 years to reassess and look at the milestones that are coming up, that are on the books, and maybe adjust based on what we've learned, that gives us a lot more ability to attack the risks and to, I'm lost for a word there. But anyway, it gives us better ability to do the right thing at the right time. The approach can provide a mechanism to facilitate the efficient cleanup, but it's really providing us informed information on what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, and people will be making that decision. The agencies, along with DOE, will sit down and we will go through this. And we said nominally 3 years. It could be 4 years. It could be 5 years. What makes sense at the time. And that's what we need to look at, is what makes sense at the time. It's really hard to say in 10 years it's going to make sense to do this work. It's hard to say that now. I mean, you could say it, but it doesn't mean a whole lot until you get closer to it and say, is that really the right thing to be doing? And that's what we need to continually assess, and that is the adaptive part of it. Next slide, please. So we're currently in a 45-day public comment period. It's not on the adaptive milestone approach. We don't have it developed yet enough to really talk as far as the details on the adaptive approach on the tool set. We're still developing that. However, the 17 milestones that are out in the public domain, that are out for public comment, are the near term, what we call the near term, because it's 22 to 24. And it will show progress, it will show good faith, it will get some work done, and it will provide enforceability for the agencies. Not that they will need to enforce anything, because we do plan to achieve these, and we do plan to work these off and learn from it. And we look forward to generating the next set that we will be working on. So the 45-day public comment period ends August 19th. Please submit your comments to the email address there, cpmilestones@rl.gov, or just send them to Jennifer Colburn, DOE. We will consider all comments, whether it's on the 17 milestones or whatever comments we get, we will address and we will look at. So right now we are asking for comments on the milestones, because that's where we need to proceed forward with. The adaptive milestone approach will generate another set of milestones in 24. Those will go to the public, because there will be some major milestones there, I'm sure, that we will be talking. So you will have a chance to look at the other milestones, the 14 that were placed in abeyance, when we're proposing to schedule those. And we don't even know that at this point, because we haven't got the system developed to provide that information to us. But when we do, that will all be out in another change package in 24, and that will go out for public comment, just like this one did. Next slide. So with that, I guess I am done, and I will turn it over to John Price, who will give an ecology perspective on the TPA milestone packages. John, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Mike, and thanks everybody for attending tonight. I'll be quick so we can get to questions. I think I've got about 4 content slides. So again, I'm John Price. I'm the Tri-Party Agreement Section Manager for the Department of Ecology, and I'm generally responsible for negotiating changes to the Tri-Party Agreement. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I'll be repeating some of the things Mike said. So, first of all, the tri-parties are not seeking comment on the adaptive milestone approach because we are not proposing any changes to the tri-party agreement legal agreement or the TPA action plan, which is an attachment to the tri-party agreement. Even though we're not seeking comment, of course, we're always happy to hear from the public, and any comments you do have, we're happy to look at those, and those always factor into our thinking. But this is not a comment period on the adaptive milestone approach. As Mike said, 14 existing milestones were suspended by the agencies to allow US DOE time to develop computer evaluation tools, as Mike mentioned. DOE asked for that time, and Ecology agreed to that, and I'll let EPA speak to that as well. So we're not currently seeking comment on that suspension. Next slide, please. So why does Ecology support DOE testing this adaptive milestone approach? As Mike mentioned, we did some pretty substantial TPA changes back in 2016, changed or created a lot of milestones. Those changes were based on a budget assumption of $1 billion per year, and Congress has appropriated less than that amount every year since. So as a result of the lower appropriations, DOE has missed or will miss most of the changed milestones. And a couple notes about that assumption of $1 billion per year. At the time we negotiated the milestones, the DOE site manager here locally did go to DOE headquarters and did get approval on making that assumption. So from Ecology's perspective, that assumption of a higher budget number was realistic. But the appropriations were less, as I said, and so Ecology and EPA have agreed to let DOE try this pilot test of the adaptive milestone approach. So as Mike mentioned, the 14 suspended milestones will have to have new dates. We've got a milestone actually for DOE to submit those new dates. That's in 2024. So those milestones are suspended, but they're not going away. And we expect that DOE will propose those new dates based on its computer evaluation. Next slide, please. Okay, so I've told you some things you can't comment on, or we're not seeking comment on. You can, as I said again, you can always submit comments. So this comment period is actually about new TPA milestones that we have negotiated for the federal fiscal years 22 through 24. That runs from October 1st, 2021 through September 30th, 2024. And as Mike said, those milestones are work that DOE and its contractors can complete in the interim period while they finish developing their computer tool and evaluating the results from that computer tool. So because that tool is still being developed, the milestones that we're asking you to comment on were not developed using that tool. And then, those 14 suspended milestones are really important to Ecology. And when DOE does propose new dates for those in 2024, we expect there will be a future public comment period with a public meeting. So there will be an opportunity to comment on any new dates for the 14 suspended milestones. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and this is my last content slide. So Ecology's perspective on the milestones for fiscal years 22 through 24 that we are asking for public comment on. So first, the positives. So one thing we like is, as Mike mentioned, DOE is looking to show some progress. And so in 2024, DOE will propose a cleanup plan for what I'll call small, shallow waste sites in the 200 area. So being smaller and shallower, they'll be perhaps easier for DOE to clean up faster and show some progress. Another thing we like is DOE has agreed to a milestone that's set out in 2026. So it's actually beyond that 3-year period. So there's a milestone for DOE to complete what's called a treatability test report. So one of the problem areas we're worried about at Hanford is there's contamination deep in the soil column, or what we call the vadose zone. And the contamination that's deep is very challenging to clean up because there are limitations to how deep excavations can be dug to get at contamination. So if you can't dig it up, you need a different technology. There aren't a lot of technologies that we see that are going to be useful for that. So DOE has been working for a number of years to develop technologies for cleaning up that deep contamination. And that would apply potentially both to some of the contaminated soil sites where liquid waste was dumped in the past in Hanford, and also ecology's hopeful that those technologies could apply around the soil that's been contaminated when there have been leaks and spills around Hanford's single shell tanks. There's also some challenges to the draft milestones that are being proposed. So those new dates for the 14 suspended milestones are due in 2024. That is a milestone. It's a milestone for new milestones. Again, those milestones were established based on a $1 billion per year budget assumption. You heard Mike talk a lot about what's reasonable to expect. I think that's one place where ecology disagrees with DOE. And in fact, there was a letter distributed today signed by the governor of Washington, the governor of Oregon, and I think 12 agencies. And that letter was sent to the White House, to the president, saying that there needs to be more funding for the Hanford cleanup. And it's got some great logic in there. I'm going to put a link to the ecology webpage in the chat box. And if you go there and just page down a little bit, you can see under the heading news where you can get a copy of that letter. And I will go to the next slide, please. And there's my contact information. And I'm going to turn it over to Craig Cameron at EPA. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I don't have a presentation, but I do have some talking points. I do want to thank people for attending this public meeting, and I wanted to, similarly to what John did, I want to talk about some of the things in the near-term milestones that we're excited about or interested in seeing followed through on. One of them is a renewed momentum to investigate waste sites and evaluate actions. Some of the operable units that we have in both the 200 East and 200 West area need to go forward because it takes a while, as we know, to go through the Superfund or the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, CERCLA process to arrive at actual cleanup. So we need to get those things going. And so some of these milestones make some progress towards that. Also, John mentioned and Mike mentioned the simple, easy waste sites, and that's good not just from a showing progress standpoint, but also, you know, for various reasons, the Department of Energy and their contractors like to tear buildings down. It shows good progress, and they need to come down, and that generates rubble. Well, when you go to dispose of that rubble in a disposal facility like the Environmental Restoration and Disposal Facility at Hanford, or ERDF, you need to have compaction material to go with that. And instead of putting in clean fill to provide for compaction, we want to balance the waste stream so that we have contaminated fill and make the best use of the land and the landfill for that material. So that's one thing that this helps with. And then again, John mentioned the laboratory and the potential follow-on field tests of deep vadose treatment technologies and implementation of things. So we want to keep that going. We don't want to have to just throw our hands up and just assume that things are only going to be addressed in the groundwater and that we can't stop, flux into the groundwater. We want to try to stop it before that happens. And then the other thing that I'm also the ERDF project manager for EPA, and so staying ahead of the disposal capacity needs for ERDF is important. And so designing the next supercell is something we can do to stay ahead of of the cleanup disposal needs. And a supercell basically is is the size of two of their. So the first few cells that were created for ERDF were there were two spanned across the width of the facility, and now that we've ended up making two of those into one, basically. So the supercells are twice as big, and we are planning the design for that. So that's something that's positive. I wanted to talk a little bit about prep mod and the adaptive milestone approach. So prep mod appears to have some promise, and we've agreed to team with DOE Ecology and their contractors to implement the modeling. We are interested in having more involvement in the different parameters and things that go into the model. So we're continuing to try to engage that way. Again, like I think Mike was saying, the model won't replace the agency managers who make the decisions or the negotiation process. It just feeds in some information that can help us make decisions. And the other thing I think I'd like to point out, and I believe that everybody has said this, but I think definitely from EPA standpoint is we don't want to think of this adaptive milestone approach as some sort of rolling milestone situation where when folks stub their toe on getting a milestone, getting things done, they say, oh, we can't finish things, or we can't meet things, and we don't want to do that. If there's a really good reason and we agree, or something serious comes up to change our priorities, then yes, we can adapt to that and change things around. But these are not replaceable milestones. They're meant to be met. And then I guess the approach will not fix all of the budget issues, but hopefully it will demonstrate some progress and lead to some stable funding. That's a goal that I know that I've heard DOE management tout, and I hope that turns out to be the case. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about the outcome of the modeling that will be done in 2024, and the dates that will be finalized for the milestones that are in abeyance, the 14 milestones that John had talked about. So the major milestones for the remedial investigation feasibility studies, that's where we evaluate the waste sites and the operable units, and we evaluate what options there are to do things about them. That major milestone is called M15 in the EPA action plan. And anyway, that major milestone, and then the remedial design, remedial action, which is the designing and actual cleanup activities, that milestone is called M16. There is another milestone similar to that for buildings. It's called M85. But my point, I guess, is that once the next set of things come in 2024, it appears very likely that the major milestones, at least one of them, will have to move out. And that's in part due to past funding shortfalls, differences in priorities between the tri-parties, and also the fact that we decided to do some interim actions for groundwater to get at some immediate problems with technetium and 99 and uranium in groundwater in the 200 East area. And we went after that as an interim action. And so that focus ends up naturally making it so the focus on getting the entire 2 groundwater operable units in the East area through the final remedial investigation feasibility study process, that gets put off. And so that naturally attributes to, or contributes to the major milestones having pressure, to potentially move. So I just wanted to bring that up, and so that people were aware of that, even though that's not an immediate thing that we're asking people to comment on. And that's really the end of my my comments or statements, and I'd be glad to answer any questions once it's opened up to everybody. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Craig, John, Mike. I appreciate those presentations. So this meeting is scheduled to 6:30, so we have about 25 minutes for questions here. I see there's about 45 people on the meeting tonight. So let's go ahead and get started. We can do this a couple of different ways. If you want to type your question into the chat, I can go ahead and read that here, or if you'd like to indicate that you'd like to ask a question, just please do that via the chat too. So we have our first question here from Liz Matson, and Liz, I think you mentioned it, Craig, the prep mod. What is prep mod? Is it the different by design model being used as part of the adaptive milestone approach? So I don't know, Craig, if you want to clarify, or Mike, you want to take that one?
I can take it.
I think I'll leave that to Mike, since he's kind of roundabout paying them. So.
Okay, so prep mod, I have not heard. I've heard prep model be used when it's referring to the computer program. PREP stands for Plateau Risk Elimination Program. It is the program we started out with the approach here to do the adaptive milestone approach. Initially, it was called Plateau Risk Elimination Program, but that's just one tool of what could be many in the long run. So that's really talking about the computer application that's behind the adaptive milestone approach. When you hear PREP, a lot of people just say PREP. It's the Plateau Risk Elimination Program. And that's how it started, was let's hit the high risk areas, let's reduce the risk on site, and do what makes sense to do in the order it makes sense to do it on. Does that answer your question, Liz?
Liz indicated she was having some audio issues, so
Okay, she
we
said
can add to the chat. Chris Sutton, you had a question. Go ahead.
Yes, this is for Mike. And Mike, these are kind of out of curiosity questions. When you talk about resuming or initiating the treatability test plan, is one of those a resumption of injecting ammonia into the deep vadozone to immobilize uranium?
No. That turned out not to be viable in the field. It turned out that there was too much complex chemical interaction that wasn't dealt with in the lab and would not have worked the way we anticipated. What we're actually talking about is, since that point, we went back to the lab. P&L is performing the testing. It's really viability testing. Is there a technology out there that's viable to somehow sequester the contaminants into the soil, and is it deployable? And that's a big question, is deployable. You may find something that can sequester the chemical, but if you got to put 10,000 wells in a small area just to deploy it, that's really not going to work. So that's what they're looking at, and that's what this report, I think they're looking at 8 different technologies that we came up with, and there's a test plan out there, and I think that's probably cleared and in the public domain at this point. I think, John, you guys have a copy of the test plan, don't you? From P&L?
I think we do have a copy, yes.
So that tells me it's cleared, and we can get you a copy if you need one, if you want to look at that. But that is the plan that P&L is working to see, is there a viable technology that can be deployed at Hanford? And that's what this report will tell us out of those 8 items that we came up with. And we had looked at many other items before that, and we came to the conclusion, no, there's nothing. And ecology talked us into try a few more. So we got a selection of 8 more technologies that the scientists, said could be feasible. Now, are they viable with our complex chemistry, and are they deployable? That's what the treatability test report will tell us. It's not a treatability test in the field, but it will tell us if there's something viable to do in the field.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. My second question is this. In your prep model, you mentioned that it uses information in the life cycle report as an input. So is this model assuming that all the information in that life cycle report is cast in stone and correct? Or will the model use that as an initial input, and then in kind of a do loop or cycle through, it will continually optimize or change information in the life cycle report until at some point the output from the model and the revitalized or the changed life cycle report are one and the same? Did I
Sorry,
say
Mike,
that
you're
right?
Okay, I guess I was on mute.
Good.
I'm sorry. So I had him put the slide back on the screen. Maybe I went through it a little too quickly. We will take the life cycle baseline as a starting point. That is our current schedule. That's the schedule for the site to do work, not just
Right.
milestones, but all the work is laid out in there. It will run, the computer application will look at that. It's not cast in concrete. We will evaluate that, and we will possibly change the life cycle baseline as we go through time. And as we start completing work and we reschedule work, they will be in conjunction with each other. So one will feed the other, which will feed the other. It's a vicious circle, as you know. And yes, it is a starting point to answer your initial question, and it will evolve with the system, with the adaptive milestone approach. The life cycle baseline will track the work we're planning to do and the scheduling of milestones, and not just milestones, but all work activities that are scheduled in the life cycle baseline will be subject to evolving with the adaptive approach.
Good, thank you very much.
Thanks for those questions, Chris. We got several questions coming in, so I just want to go through these quickly here. Liz Matson asks, has a clarifying question. She had heard that the adaptive milestone approach would just be used on the river corridor if the pilot goes well. Presentation sounded like the intent was to expand it to all milestone negotiations for the whole site. Can someone clarify?
Right now, the approach is going to focus on the 14 milestones in abeyance and the near-term milestones that we have. The near-term milestones were not using any type of adaptive milestone approach. There were some good faith milestones of activities that we felt we needed to move on in the next few years. So yes, it is going to focus on the Central Plateau and the 14 milestones in abeyance. We're anticipating it will be successful. Of course, we wouldn't anticipate it wouldn't, or we wouldn't be proceeding. So we anticipate it will be successful and that we will expand it. And I could actually see it expanding not just milestones, but actually helping us schedule all work activities that we're going to be doing in the future, whether they're milestones or not. And hopefully across the whole site. But right now it is focused on the Central Plateau, the 14 milestones in abeyance.
All right, thanks, Mike. Next question is from Mia Burke. I'm sorry if I messed up your name, Mia. Go ahead.
Hey, no, you pronounced it perfectly. Thank you. So my question is, are these 3 years of milestones already finalized with the contractor CPC Co? And if so, if USDOE has already established task orders for 3 years, how will public comments be taken into account in the annual budget cleanup priorities meeting that happens in the spring?
If we need to change contracts, we change contracts. I mean, we do contract changes all the time. We hope we have anticipated it, and we do have the set that's out in the public domain into the task orders, but things change. We do contract changes if needed. We don't like to. It's a lot of work, but if needed, we will do contract changes.
So just to clarify, then they are finalized with the contractor?
No, it is not finalized yet, and I really can't talk any more about that because it's not finalized.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, Mia. Next question is from Tom Cecilia. And Tom asks, how do you fit short, near-term milestones into the big picture with external constraints like WIP, and that's the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, potentially closing in 2050? Do you anticipate the rest of the plateau wrapping into the model for DOE Richland and Office of River Protection scopes?
We do eventually expect that the rest of the site will roll into the model. That is our hopes and our plans if it's successful with the Central Plateau. The near-term milestones that we're working from 22 to 24 are activities that we sat down with the agencies, decided were the right things to do over the next few years while we develop the adaptive milestone approach. The adaptive milestone approach will take into account WIP and all the other factors that need to, and will provide us information to proceed from that point on. At this point, I really can't say.
And this is one of John's favorite topics. So you want to say something, John?
Go ahead, John.
Sure. I want to disagree with you, Mike, on your last statement. So first of all, I'm involved in holistic negotiations with the Office of River Protection right now, and we're going to hopefully reach agreement and have new milestones that we're going to enter in federal court. So I don't see, maybe you can take the data from those milestones and run it in the model, and that may be useful, but I don't see the model being used to revise the Office of River Protection work for tank waste retrieval and waste treatment. And then the other, I do have a concern about the WIP closure date. I think there's an awful lot of work that DOE needs to get done early because it may generate transuranic waste. And, Ecology's looking at that 2050 date as a hard deadline. And I think that's going to have to be factored as priority work. So I think that's going to be a difficult challenge for DOE.
And you're right, John. The model will allow us to put certain constraints where there are existing milestones in place. So that will have to factor in with everything else that it's looking at. So there is that ability to put those constraints on there. And as far as what's going to WIP, that's a little out of my area. So I'm not that knowledgeable on it, but it will be something that will be factored in, I'm sure.
Okay, next question is from Robert Davis. Rob asks, are the small surface building removals based on risk?
Are the small circles?
Surface.
Yeah, you mentioned that you were trying to show progress by removing a lot of the smaller surface buildings. The question is, are all those surface buildings high risk? And if not, how are we justifying that? Just because it's going to appear like we're cleaning up. So I have two other comments, but probably more important. One is once the adaptive model starts working and starts giving you data and information, and you expect this probably in the year 23 out there and start looking at your model, would there be any indication that these 14 milestones that we're renegotiating now would change at all if your model indicated they needed to be changed?
I don't know the milestone would change. I think the order or the scheduling might change from what we had in the past based on what seems to make sense. But to answer your first question, I might have misspoke. It's shallow waste sites that we would be looking at, cleaning up some shallow waste sites on the Central Plateau.
But again, those would be all at an elevated risk. Your risk models would indicate that these need it. We're not doing it just because it's there. Okay.
Well, this is Craig.
It's easy to get.
Yeah, this is Craig. Okay.
Go ahead, Craig.
So part of it is, we picked waste sites that didn't have a lot of conflicting relationships to more complicated waste sites next to them that need to be characterized and evaluated with, more options of what to do with those more complicated waste sites. So that's one of the reasons why we grouped and pulled these simple shallow waste sites out of their original operable units. And then the other reason is that, and I had mentioned the buildings. So there are some buildings, and some of them do have significant risk, and some of them are not as risky, but they do tend to be demolished and sent to ERDF. And so again, my point was that I want to make sure that we have in time to go with that waste stream from those buildings, whether they're big or small or complex or whatever, that there's some contaminated material, soil go in with those. So that's part of the goal of having those early shallow sites. And then also we're kind of getting the capacity to do some, we're building the capacity that'll eventually be used to deal with some of the more complicated waste sites. So
Okay.
that's kind of the idea.
Okay, I understand that. My only other comment is that I'd like people to remember that we've had lots and lots of brand new ideas on our projects. And one of them was the computer modeling and the work we had with BNFL, a British firm. And one of the big conflicts why they didn't succeed here on the site was because the standards are different and the codes are different. And we spent years working with DOE and BNFL trying to come to an agreement. And in most every case, it just put a pause and a halt on the project over and over again. So I'd really be wareful of using a program that's untested to help make our decisions when we do have a lot of common sense in our management there. I hope you do all the appropriate checks and balances on these before making decisions. Thank you. That's the end of my comment.
All right. Thanks, Rob. Looks like we have a question from Dan Sears. Go ahead, Dan.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, great. Thank you. So I wanted to just preface this by saying we strongly support the letter that Ecology coordinated requesting full funding for cleanup at Hanford. And it was a little disturbing, more than a little bit, to kind of hear the disconnect between the agencies about how they're approaching this adaptive milestone project, whether it's something that is supposed to show progress for Department of Energy, even though really what it's setting up is the prospect of inadequate funding for the foreseeable future. So energy seems to be working backwards from the expectation that it will have inadequate funding, while ecology is looking for a practical way to move forward. And I also just want to say this has real impacts for groundwater. It was good to hear EPA acknowledge that these contaminants are bound for groundwater if not intercepted. So to that effect, one of the questions we had was about characterization and whether the characterization work that's described, for instance, for SW2 can be accelerated, move forward. Right now, the proposed milestone change is to set a date to initiate the characterization, and that starts in 2024. So that again, would have to inform an RIFS, out in the future. And just to give a little bit of context, so folks who are listening, we're talking about sites, some of which are entirely unknown. They don't know how many trenches are in some of these burial grounds. Other sites where they do know have many kilograms of plutonium or hundreds of kilograms of uranium. So really significant amounts of contamination in some of these areas. And so, yeah, to sum it up, I would just say the question to you guys is characterization something that the agencies could make more progress on sooner?
I don't really have a good answer for that. That is one of the milestones that's in abeyance, and we will be looking at that. We are also looking at a similar approach with what we did with the inner area operable unit recently, where there may be some similar waste sites that we have characterization on, that we could use some of that information to accelerate the characterization effort and the RIFS process. But we're still looking at that.
John or Craig, anything to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I'll add to that, especially, Dan called the operating unit by its designation, the 200-SW2. So that concerns about 20 radioactive waste burial grounds in the 200 area. And there was a 2018 date to initiate characterization. That's been pushed back. I would say generally, Dan, a lot of the milestones that have been suspended were characterization milestones. I do have a particular concern about those burial grounds because if there was an investigation and it was determined that some of the cleanup decision is to dig up some of that waste, it could generate transuranic waste, and that transuranic waste would have to get to WIP by 2050. So I think it's going to be a challenge for DOE to get through the investigation of those burial grounds, get the decision made, and get the cleanup done and still fit within the WIP date. So I think that's going to be very challenging.
All right, thanks for that question, Dan. Our next question is from Ace Hoffman, and Ace asks, how deep is the waste that is too deep to dig out? Is the problem related to cost, safety, or technology, and will it get worse over time? I think, John, this may be in reference to your deep treatability, deep beta zone treatability test slide. But Mike or John, if you want to address that.
I can answer that, or I'll go first, and then Mike can. Yes. So the waste that is too deep. Well, so generally, the limits of how deep you can dig range in different people's opinions, anywhere from probably 30 feet down to a maximum of 80 feet or 100 feet. Some of that contamination goes all the way to the groundwater, so it's as much as 250 feet or more below the ground surface, and so it is deep. I think I answered that question. Craig, do you want to add anything relative to the BC cribs and trenches? Because that's another place where there's deep vadose contamination.
Yeah, there's a real, I've heard it called the mother lode before, but there's a lot of deep technetium-99 down there, and there's been varying modeling about when that's going to make it to groundwater, but the idea is that something has to be done or it'll make it there. And so we actually had a treatability test run for the 200 BC1 operable unit, which is what the BC cribs and trenches are in. And it was initially focused on desiccation, the idea of drying out the water in the layers, which drives the technetium-99 down. And then seeing, trying to predict whether that would stay dried out well enough to limit the flux so that it didn't go above drinking water standards. But one of the things we found out when they did the study is they were actually able to suck on on it hard enough that the pore water, some of it was ripped from the formation, and some of the technetium-99 was actually pulled up with it. But it's not entirely clear, how feasible it is scaled up. So that's one of the things where, that and some modeling that we're going to have done that'll be in this WA1, BC1 RFS work plan. Some of that work will go forward, and that'll help us decide if that desiccation process and potentially ripping the material, the pore water out, is a meaningful remedy or not.
So I agree with John's comments there on the fact that you could probably go down maybe 80 feet, but you're going to have trouble getting much below that. And part of that is the amount of area you have to have for the slopes and the laydown. And you just start running into interferences on the Central Plateau. There's just not that much room to be able to go there. And not to mention the enormous cost it would be to go down that far. That would really be hard to justify going that deep. There are other technologies. P&L is looking at sequestration technologies. Right now, we're doing soil flushing. very successfully on the river corridor. We would like to explore if there's a way we could do soil flushing on the plateau and push some of it down where we can capture it in the groundwater and take care of it that way. There are different ways to do it besides just digging up massive amounts of soil. So we are looking at that, and as John said, we do have a report coming out of P&L in 26 that will tell us viability on sequestration. And I know there are some people looking at what we've done on the river with the soil flushing. It's been very successful at K, and we would like to find a way to put that on the Central Plateau. It's just harder because you're going down a lot deeper, and there's some channeling, lateral channeling that we would have to overcome. We don't want to be pushing contaminate across the site. We want to push it down to where we can capture it into an extraction well. So there are different things we are looking at.
All right. Thank you, Mike. So we are at 6:30. We do have a few more questions left. We want to be respectful of everyone's time, but we also want to make sure we answer all the questions we have tonight. So we're going to continue a little bit over here, and going to take our next question from Laura Feldman. And Laura says, I'm concerned about the computer application that will direct milestone cleanup. Who oversees it? What is the human-computer model interface? And how much input will humans have in this model?
Okay, so we don't have an output from the computer model yet, but the computer model will just provide information. It will not be making decisions. It will not be scheduling milestones. EPA, Ecology, and DOE will schedule the milestones. We will use information from the computer model. We will look at it. If it doesn't make sense, we're not going to use it. But we will, get that first output later this year, early next year, and we will start looking at this, and hopefully it will provide valuable information. That's what we're anticipating to help us make decisions, but it will not do it on its own. It will be people that will be making these decisions and evaluating it. It's just another data point to help us make the right decision.
All right, thanks. And thanks for that question, Laura. We have another question from Mia. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I have two questions actually. The first one is, can you provide any information as to how this computer model worked at Sellafield, the nuclear waste site in the UK, which I think you're using as a guide for how it might work for Hanford. So how did it work there?
I was told it worked very well there, and that's why it was selected as a starting point. It is a starting point. We are customizing it, and we are making it Hanfordized, so to speak, so that it will be for our use. But yes, the basis of the program did start in Sellafield. It was successful there, and we hope to take that success and bring that to Hanford.
Okay, my second question is, why wasn't proposed milestone M15-92F given a due date? It just has TBD. And this is a milestone that sets a date for milestone M15-112. Yeah.
All right, we're just getting it up here, Mia.
Okay.
Oh, okay. That is TBD because that was based on resources both on the regulators and on DOE. That is for IS1, and it was agreed that we would do IS1. We would submit that package 7 days after approval of EA1 because the same people doing EA1 will move on to IS1. That was the initial concept way back when we set up milestone 112 the last time. And it's still the concept is the people working on EA1 will move on to IS1. And so once EA1 is done, I think it's a 7-day time frame to get that proposal or that milestone change into the regulators for IS1. So we don't know when EA1 is going to be approved at this point. And so we didn't want to throw a date on that we're going to have to change later. We tried to make it trigger based on EA1 being complete.
Okay, thank you.
What was the other milestone you were talking about? One.
No, it was a milestone basically making a deadline for another milestone.
Yes, and then
So
that's what 92F is. It's a milestone to submit a milestone to complete IS1.
yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And so it's TBD because we don't know when EA1 will be complete.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Mia. Another question from Liz Matson about the model. When do you anticipate that the model will be ready to test? Are the tri-party agencies willing to bring the model to the public to explain in more detail and provide an opportunity for input?
That I don't have a good question for. It is not part of the TPA. It is just a tool that we're using. There's a lot of different tools that we use in our day-to-day work. How much of this will be out to the public, I can't tell you at this point. It's still under development at this point.
All right, thanks, Mike. I've been remiss. I need to check and see if there's anybody that's just joining us by phone tonight who might have a question and was unable to put that in the chat box. Is there anyone on the phone who would like to ask a question? Okay. Well, I think we have run out of questions in the chat box. Are there any final questions before we wrap up tonight? Liz says, will it?
I would actually like to make a statement too. So we talked about this in terms of milestones and the adaptive milestone approach and the computer model that will provide some information on some of the factors, the risks and everything. But there's a lot of other work we do out there that is not milestone driven. There's a lot of activities, and this will help us schedule some of those activities too. So there's a lot of good work, a lot of good risk reduction we're doing out there. Not everything is driven by milestones. I know the public generally sees more of the milestone driven work, but there's a lot of other work that we're doing out there on a daily basis, reducing risk in the canyons, around the waste sites, that really doesn't come to light because it's not, quote, a milestone. Milestones are a way to try and gauge the work that's being done, but a lot of good work is being done out there, and I don't want people to underestimate or not realize the fact that there is a lot of good work being done out there besides just the milestones.
All right, and I'm not sure if this got addressed. Liz asked, do the agencies have an estimate when the model will be ready to test?
I think we're looking at trying to get some draft output in January of next year.
January 2023, okay. Okay, I want to go around the room here with the agencies real quick before we close. Mike, do you have any final words before we wrap up?
I actually just said them, so
okay.
I didn't know you were going to go around.
No, that's fine. Excellent. John?
No, I guess I will say again, the budget is a big concern to Ecology. I mentioned the letter that Ecology and others sent today. So I think that's going to continue to be, a source of tension, with DOE, and we'll just continue to work on that. Thank you.
All right, Craig, last shot.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank people again for participating, and I guess on the budget thing, we're of course part of the federal government, so we don't have the same relationship that the state does. However, we do expect a certain amount of detail in the budget information that we receive, and to receive it in a timely manner so that we can help come up with priorities for the site when we don't, or when we do struggle to have adequate funding. So that's all I wanted to say.
All right, thanks, Craig, and thank everybody for joining us tonight. Thanks for the conversation on behalf of the Tri-Party Agreement agencies. I want to just remind you that we have about 10 days here in this comment period to submit your comments through August 19th. Again, you can find more details about this comment period on hanford.gov. And if you go to the events calendar on the homepage, you can get to the fact sheet and other information, links to other information with more details about the adaptive approach and about the proposed changes. So thank you again and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.